I don't really know what to do for the intro here, so let's start blabbing right away. What is a feed tape? A feed tape, or piston feed tape in this context, is basically just a bunch of blocks being pushed around in a loop by a few pistons. And that's it. It's a pretty simple concept, and in general, they're not that hard to make, but the complexity comes in the different ways that feed tapes can be built and used. Before all that, though, in case you're not super familiar with feed tapes, I've prepared some example ones for you just to help you get acquainted, get the concept a little. I'll let the live footage me show them off to you. Hello there, it is the live version of me showing off in real time some piston feed tapes. If I turn this on, you can see that is certainly a bunch of pistons moving blocks in a loop. This is a pretty decent example of a pretty normal feed tape, I'd say. It's got some wacky wiring, but the wiring tends to be wacky on these things. But as you can see, blocks moving in a loop. If you focus on the black block, it sure is moving. And this whole contraption is just to turn the thing on and off with a lever. It pushes a block over when the lever's on to complete the loop, and sends a short pulse through to start everything up. Here's another feed tape. This one is horizontal and completely flush along the top. So you could, like, if you wanted to decorate with this, you could put a little shell around it and cover up all the pistons and hide all the redstone. I don't really know what else to say. Again, it's a piston feed tape. It's pushing a bunch of blocks around in a cycle. I got another black block on this one to show it off, I guess. This one here, believe it or not, it's another piston feed tape. It's parallel to the ground, so like horizontal, I guess. And it's also a bit faster just because of the way I did the wires and how it's pushing two blocks at once. That's a big help to make it fast. But it is still moving a bunch of blocks in a cycle. Still a pretty standard one, I'd say, because it's a square. Most of them are square. I say that because I also made a weird one. And as odd as it is in fact pushing blocks in a cycle using pistons, so it is in fact a piston feed tape. You can tell it's a cycle because based on this gray block, it is pretty slow, and I don't really know why you would ever want to make one in this shape, but the option is there. Anyway, those were my feed tapes. Hopefully, if you weren't familiar before, you have some idea of what I'm talking about. I'm sending you back to recording me, so see you there. Thanks for that. Now, how can you make a feed tape suited to your needs? Conveniently for you, I've written a script for this video, which includes a 4-step process that I made up. I feel like it works though, so basic feed tapes. Step 1, plan out your loop. Think about how many blocks you want to have in your loop, or how long you want your loop to be. If you want it to go through all the colors of wool in order, for example, you would need a 16-block cycle to your feed tape. If you just want to swap between a few different lights, you may only need 5 or 6 block cycle. If your cycle is short enough though, like if it's only 2 or 3 blocks, you may want to consider doubling your pattern to make it easier to set up a feed tape for it. Step 2, take the length of your fancy new cycle and plot out a rectangle made of that many blocks, plus 1 or 2. These extra blocks are here to give space for the pistons to push things around, because if the spaces weren't here, the blocks would end up getting pushed out of the loop and things would break and be all messy and stuff. The specific dimensions of this rectangle will change depending on how long your cycle is. One thing to note though is if you want the feed tape to be completely flush on one side, like if you're making a wall or floor decoration of some sort, you'll likely want to consider making the rectangle either 2 blocks tall or 2 blocks wide, so that you can use a sticky piston to pull blocks from the opposite side freeing up space for one of your sides to be exposed or flush against something. Step 3, put in your pistons. You'll want them near the corners of the rectangle, and no two pistons should face along the same side. They should also point along a consistent path, either clockwise or counterclockwise, so that the blocks pushed by one piston will eventually end up in the path of another one. And again, with the sticky piston, since it's going to be pulling blocks instead of pushing them, it should be on the opposite side that a normal piston would be on, and facing in the opposite direction, so it's actually looking at the blocks. And step 4, wiring everything up. This is probably the most tricky part, especially if you want to make it look neat and tidy, but to make one that just works, you just have to set it up so that the pistons fire in the right order. The correct order to trigger your pistons is a bit awkward to think about though, so I'll try to describe it simply. If you imagine the direction your blocks will be moving as a ring rotating either clockwise or counterclockwise, you want to trigger the pistons in an order that goes opposite to that ring. The speed of your feed tape will most likely be impacted by this step, so if you want it to run faster, it might be a good idea to fiddle with your wires a bit, screw around with repeater timings or torch placements or something. Another thing you could do if you have 2 gaps in your loop is to trigger 2 pistons at a time instead of just 1. Since most of the time is spent waiting for pistons to extend and retract, multitasking helps quite a bit to shorten the time it takes to finish a rotation. Knowing how to make a piston feed tape is cool and all, but it's not that useful if you don't know how to use one. Luckily, I've put in some of that into this video too. The first and probably most obvious use for these is pretty simple. It's for decoration. Having the ability to have a cycling set of blocks can be nice for adding motion to your builds, like with a conveyor belt in a factory setting, or some sort of lab pipe, or creativity. Put it in there. If you want to add functionality to the mix, you can load up a feed tape with a bunch of workbenches and make a block swapper of sorts. Press the button, and an entire section of wall is replaced with functional blocks. With a similar idea in mind, you can spruce up any place you need a combination lock. Instead of having a bunch of item frames or a bunch of levers or anything like that, you can have rotating wheels of any blocks of your choosing, assuming they're pushable. A common choice to go for is all the colors of wool or concrete, but if you want to attach this to a riddle, you can put most blocks in there, like I said. You would just need to some way to keep track of the current selection and see whether it's right or not. And believe it or not, piston feed tapes can help you there as well. On the more data processing side of things, piston feed tapes are pretty good at storing looping sets of signals and repeating them back. They can do this thanks to movable blocks with comparator outputs, like composters and cauldrons. If you only want a looping set of binary signals, you can just throw in activated copper bulbs. You can also use a more old school technique by using transparent and opaque blocks in your feed tape, powering one of the blocks with a signal through a repeater or a torch or something, and trying to pull an output from that. I'm not sure how relevant this method is in more recent updates due to copper bulbs doing a similar thing, but more compact. But it's still an option to use if you want it or think it might be more useful. Returning to our combination lock example, to keep track of whether or not the input is correct, you could have a secondary feed tape in the background with the same cycle length as your display feed tape with the colors of wool or whatever, just with the secondary feed tape having one copper bulb and everything else some other stuff. If you rotate the background feed tape at the same time you do the display one, because their cycles are the same length, they'll stay in sync with each other. Then you could read one specific position on the secondary feed tape to see if it's the bulb, emitting an output if it is. It's just a matter of placing the bulb in the right spot and reading the right spot to line up with what you want the correct option to be on the display feed tape. And that is pretty much all I've got for piston feed tapes. As usual, questions are more than welcome in the comments just in case you didn't understand something or you're curious about something I didn't mention. Past that, I don't have anything specific to say, so have a good day and have fun doing some redstone.